Hello and welcome to A Healthy Bite. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. I wanted to share with you two books, one that I have read some time ago, but one that I recently finished and felt so inspired about I wanted to share it. I had to share it with you. One is called, they're both by the same author, a historian, a Dutch historian called Rutger Bergman, and he wrote a book a few years back called Utopia for Realists and How We Can Get There. And it was all about the universal basic wage and how all discussion about whether we could afford to have a universal basic income for everybody. That means everybody would be on something like $12,000 a year, and even if you were a multi-millionaire, you would get it, as well as a person that was on the very lowest of low income or a pensioner. Everybody would get $12,000 a year. The millionaire would no doubt pay that back in their tax, but everybody would get it. No questions asked, no obligations set. Could the society afford such an initiative? And what they found was that not only could the society afford it, but they could actually, it was actually revenue neutral. That the benefits, the flow-on benefits from relieving people of the stress of poverty, improved their health, improved their education, improved every measure of social and societal well-being, individual and society well-being. So the universal basic income was a terrific book, Utopia for Realists. So when I saw his newest book, Humankind, A Hopeful History, I just had to read it. And what a great read it is. I totally recommend it to you. We hear so much about the survival of the fittest, and I've mentioned this before, I've never really thought of evolution as a political construct, but survival of the fittest, when you think about it, fits very well into our Western neoliberal capitalist model, survival of the fittest. But when we look at history, you kind of realize that maybe that isn't the case. For example, Neanderthals were bigger than us and they had bigger brains than us. So you would think that if it was survival of the fittest, Neanderthals should have won that battle. What Rutger Bergman shows in several of his chapters is there was actually survival of the friendliest. The fact that we as humans are a friendly, collaborative and extremely communicative species is the secret to our success. And it's that friendliness, that collaboration, which has won out, evolutionarily speaking, and continues to win out today on many levels. Oh, look, it's a great book. It's a great read. He talks about various things. For example, The Lord of the Flies book has often been used. You may know the story of a group of English schoolboys that are shipwrecked and their hierarchical way in which they organise themselves and the way they treat the weaker members of the group. In fact, in a real life instance of that occurring in the Polynesia, which went on for a considerably longer period of time than The Lord of the Flies. I think it went on for a 15 or 18 month period. The boys were so collaborative and so supportive, and that was how they survived. So the real story was very different. Similarly, he touches on the Stanford student prisoner trial, where Stanford University divided its research group into prisoners and guards. And of course, the story goes that within a very short period of time, the guards became really brutal with the prisoners. And that is just an example of how terrible human beings are. Well, actually, the truth is something quite different, because that has been shown to be a sham, that study, and yet is still repeated time and time again in many psychology courses. Look, the book is just an absolute joy to read. We should be referred to as Homo puppies or the Homo friendly, because that is what has given us the strength and the and the ability to succeed. And actually what I'm also doing as a companion to that book has started to explore the Polyvagal Theory written by Dr. Stephen Porges, which is an absolute fabulous read. And you might think, well, what's the connection between Humankind, a joyful history, and Polyvagal Theory? And it actually is interesting because Rutger Bergman gives a social and historical perspective to our success as a species, and Stephen Porges actually gives us a neurological explanation for that, our ability to look at other human beings almost from birth, and to be able to judge their reaction and respond to it by mirroring and understanding and our nuanced response of our neurology to our fellow human beings, and the impact that has on our development. So that's a book that I'm just diving into. But I wanted to share those two books in particular, Utopia for Realists and Humankind, A Joyful History, both by Rutger Bergman. I'd recommend it as a strong read. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.